that we're live now, so I guess we'll go ahead and start this meeting. I'll call this meeting to order, special meeting of the Region 15 Board of Education for Monday, July 20th. We'll start with the Pledge of Allegiance, please.
Marion, there seems to be a problem.
Oh.
Your network bandwidth is low.
You can't hear me, Richard?
It's on my computer. It says Marion Manzo's network bandwidth is low.
Okay.
Marion, we can still hear you and it's still streaming.
Okay.
You're
All right.
fine going.
All right. Thank you, Richard, for pointing that out. I appreciate it. But so let's stand and we'll do the Pledge of Allegiance. Right. I pledge allegiance to the flag
of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
All right. Region 15 mission statement. The mission of Region 15, a collaborative community committed to excellence, is to educate every student to be productive, ethical, and engaged in a global society through proven and innovative learning experiences supported by its strong community, whose decision-making is based on the best interest of all students. Before we get into the heart of our meeting, I just wanted to say a couple of things. While the last two Board of Ed meetings have been in person, we knew tonight's meeting would have a lot of attendees regarding our reopening plans. So we decided to be virtual to allow the greatest public access to this meeting. Our Board of Ed meetings will be back to being in person in August. So thank you everyone for your patience. I also wanted to take a moment to address Mr. Brian Watson's resignation from the Board of Education. When Mr. Watson first started on the Board of Ed, he was assistant principal, and he has since become a middle school principal with a significant increased time commitments. Stepping back was a difficult decision, but an understandable decision for him. Brian was instrumental in bringing change to our district, and his knowledge of education was critical to that change. Brian didn't speak much, but when he did, everyone listened. So we are very grateful for Brian's 3 years of service on the Board of Education, and we will miss him greatly. Our first item up on the agenda is the 2020-2021 Region 15 school calendar with Mr. Smith.
Thank you. So we're going to talk a little bit more about this when we get into the presentation.
Josh,
later.
Can you
hear me?
Did you get that?
I did. Can you hear me?
I'm getting text. It's been hard to hear me.
It is. You may want to mute your
I can hear you.
video. If you stop the video.
Right. If I turn off video, is that better?
Yes.
Yes. Okay. So how about if I start I just had two important comments that I wanted to make that I'm sure that I wanted everyone to hear. And I apologize that my video was going in or my voice is going in and out. But I wanted to state that while the last two Board of Ed meetings have been in person, we knew that tonight's meeting would have a lot of attendees regarding our reopening plans. So we decided to be virtual to allow the best access to the public for this meeting. Our meetings in August will be back to being in person. I also wanted to take a moment to address Mr. Brian Watson's resignation from the Board of Education. When Mr. Watson first started on the Board of Ed, he was an assistant principal, and he has now since become a middle school principal with significant increased time commitments. Stepping back was a difficult but understandable decision for him. Brian was instrumental in bringing much needed change to our district, and his knowledge of education was critical in that regard. Brian didn't speak much, but when he did, people most certainly listened. We are very grateful for Brian's 3 years of service, and we will miss him greatly. Next up on the agenda is the 2021 Region 15 school calendar. Josh.
Thank you, Marion. I'm going to share out my screen, so you should be able to see this now. We're going to talk about this more when we get into the full presentation on school reopening. But what we are going to propose as part of the calendar piece is really twofold. The first is to restructure some of the staff professional development days. And we feel that this part is really within the administration to shift around, as it doesn't impact the student calendar and what the board had adopted for families when this calendar was put in place. However, based on the changes by the governor's office and the flexibility granted to school districts at the beginning of the year, we are proposing to take the first 4 days of the incoming school year, September 1st through September 4th, and change those into half days. And this does a couple things. And again, I'll talk about this again later on in the presentation. But as we transition students back to school, and as we enter the plan that we're going to review tonight, there's a large amount of unknowns. And having partial days does a few things. We can't model this change in a academic environment. There's no way to pressure test a school district plan. So by doing half days, is we're effectively doing that, and we can run drop off and dismissal and all the things that we're changing in a shortened day, and provide one time for students to adjust, and then time for staff to reflect and make changes in the afternoon. The other thing it does is a couple years ago, the district created half days because of heat in our schools. So this also provides the ability for students who will be most likely wearing masks during this time to adjust and acclimate to what it's like to be in school with masks on, and to retrain and be there. While the state did provide the ability for school districts to reduce their school calendar by 3 days, the district's concerned that a reduction of student instruction by further pushing out the school year only exacerbates the fact that students have been out of school since March. So, and that the first couple of days of the school year are going to be about reacclimating students. And so we thought this was a good compromise by moving some of the staff professional development and front loading that, and providing the half days. Students can still start to acclimate when we were supposed to start. We use the relief that the state allowed in reduction of school to really just offset some of the shortened days, but students would still come. And I'll talk some more about what we're going to do with those days later on. And then also the kindergarten students would really start on the 2nd, because we feel that the first day return to school is going to be somewhat chaotic. And that students in grades 1 through 12 are going to have to relearn some of what they know about school. How you walk in hallways, for example, is not something that we normally talk to high school sophomores about. How to get off the school bus, how to get on the school bus, all of those things are going to be new learning, not just for students, but for us as well. And even though we've kind of rehearsed it in an academic environment, we haven't done it yet in a large school district. So having those half days will allow time for students to do that. And then by having our kindergarten students who've never been to school before, be able to transition after we've done that. School can be an intimidating transition for a 5-year-old. And normally we have more time to process and take bus rides and acclimate. And so the idea of pushing that start one day will allow administrators, guidance counselors, teachers, kind of a smoother entrance for our youngest learners. I share this with the board tonight because this calendar was adopted by the board. There isn't a motion to adopt it tonight, but at our next meeting, we would ask one for some consensus if this is a path that the board agrees with or has questions about. And then we would ask at a future meeting for these dates to be solidified prior to the start of school, and enough time for us to notice families. And by talking about it tonight, we want to put it on families' radar about some of these potential changes so that people can plan accordingly. Any questions? And some of this, it may be better if you have questions, you can certainly ask them now, but I may answer some of them later on in the presentation. So I could, instead of answer, if you have questions, we can take them now, but some of the answers I'll either provide or tell you that they're coming later on. Mary, do you want me to call on folks? I can see their hand raised. Are you good with that? Or do you want me to defer?
I see Heather's water has a question.
Your audio
Are you
is
hearing me?
breaking up.
Oh my goodness.
So that's okay. If you can hear us, if you don't mind,
Okay.
I will, Steve had his hand up first.
Oh, am I muted? I was just going to, and we can answer this later, or if the board's going to have a vote on calendar in the future, fine. But for Columbus Day and Election Day, any chance we could consider making them school days in the event that we go to a more restrictive stage later in the year? You know, we could have had 2 days, more school up, front loaded, if you will. Is that a possibility? Are those PA days, Veterans Day? I'm sorry, Columbus Day and Election Day?
So Election Day, so we are trading the days. So currently teachers are, November 3rd is one of their contractual work days, and August 24th is not. So we are moving the November 3rd to the August 24th. So if we want them to be available on that day for a school day, we either have to move a different school day, which potentially could happen, or compensate them for that day. So at this model as it is right now, it does not increase the teacher's work year, and we do not, doesn't incur any cost to the district. If you want to take some of those days and make them school days, that would have financial implications, unless we take another school day where we couldn't be in session, for example, and move that.
That's, yeah, like from the end of the year, or if there's a quarantine period, we could take it from there and try and just get as much higher the hybrid model or the full-time, whatever the sort of the more in-person synchronous models, get those in when we can. But we can talk about it. There's just a question. We can talk about it later.
Yeah, it's plausible.
Yeah.
And Heather, you had a question? Dwyer?
Yes, hi. For the pre-K, I know that year that we had all those heat index days, I think we didn't have pre-K until they were done. So would we start pre-K the first week of September, or would we hold it until the second week?
So as of now, I'll look to Dr. Sharetto to see if she wants to weigh in on that. But our current conversation is that they would start on September 1 with the other students.
Okay.
I have to agree. That's where we are right now. We do have to think about it because we have half-day types programs, but we would like them to start if we can.
Thank you.
Any other questions?
Josh, I have a question.
Yes, sir.
Josh, I happen to agree with Steve on the opening of school on Columbus Day and the Election Day. I believed, and I think Steve does too, that we might have to close down in the middle of the year. So to get 2 extra days in early would be a benefit to Region 15. That's about the only change that I could comment on the calendar, because I would like to get the days in as soon as possible. I have a feeling in December or January, we're going to close the schools down again. I know your answers, but we have to work around those answers.
We can look into making that possible. Any other questions on that? It looks like Marion may have disconnected. Yes, Mr. Cookson, you would be the ranking official in charge. Are you okay with me continuing on to the planning for school reopening? I can unmute. Oh, and Marion's back.
Sorry about that. I apologize.
That's okay. Are you comfortable moving on to the presentation on school opening?
Yes, thank you.
Josh, am I unmuted now in the main system?
You are.
So I can turn my phone off?
Yes.
Okay.
Okay. So you should now see my screen. Okay. We'll take you through tonight where we are. I'll say this multiple times. This is a work in progress. And literally, I think every time I've done some version of this, there's been some change. We were on a webinar with staff in the district, and there was a change this afternoon, or at least a press conference where some of this was reaffirmed. So all of this comes in a very fluid environment. So tonight, really the purpose is to give everybody an idea of where we're at. There's a lot of questions that you will most likely have that are going to be more handled by health professionals. I think that we can speak in general to some of these questions. In many cases, we've had conversations about some of the medical concerns and questions people have, but I am not a doctor. I did not sleep at any brand name hotel last night that I won't mention. But we have spent a lot of time over the last few months deeply having conversations about the medical implications of everything that we're doing. So while I think that we're informed, some of the questions that you have, I will defer to medical advisors and experts in the area. After tonight, most likely tomorrow, this presentation and the entire draft plan that will be submitted, or in some version will be submitted to the state, will be available on the website. In addition, on our website now are many of the documents that we use to inform our thinking about the work that went into this plan. In the next few weeks, our principals will be having meetings with their staff and communications with parents of children in their schools, because some of the questions that you'll have will be about specific schools, grade levels, programs. Tonight, I'm going to focus more on an overview of what happens in all of our schools and the nuances of each of those grade levels and school buildings will be better answered by our administrators in those buildings. We have set up on our website a section just for reopening plans, and there is a standalone email address. So if there's comments or thoughts or questions that you would like more information on, or contribute your thoughts, please use that email address. It's monitored by multiple people, so we'll make sure that information gets in the right hands. When we go into this work, our main goal is to reopen schools. However, that decision is completely fluid until later in the summer, and in most likelihood will not be a school district only decision. We will not open schools if they're not safe, and that the definition of the climate that schools can reopen in is not one that I alone will create, or even as a school district we will create. The criteria and the decision matrix for that will really come from medical professionals, at least regionally and most likely statewide. I want to be clear when we go into this, all of what we're going to talk about tonight is a compromised instructional model. In-person student instruction is the most effective instructional model that there is. If it means that we have to create a compromised school district in order to get students in, that's still more beneficial than a totally remote environment, assuming the safety parameters are there and that student and staff can take rational and realistic measures to reduce as much risk as possible. It would be overreaching for me to say we would eliminate all risk. That's not true on any day. There's always some risk. Our job is to mitigate that to the greatest extent possible. And then at some point, each family is going to have to make a decision as to the level of risk their family is comfortable with, and to the extent that we've mitigated as much risk as we can. This is a fluid process. I've said it already tonight. There are so many factors that influence everything that we do here. As many of them as possible, I think that we've been thoughtful and deliberate in our thinking, but a lot of these decisions are going to be shaped by factors far outside the school district. And what remote learning looks like will depend on the needs of the grade. So while tonight I'm going to talk pretty much in generalities, and I will wade into some specifics, I can't go into too much detail as to what each grade or subject area might look like. And we'll leave that for follow-up questions, and certainly building level and people closer to that work to fill in some of the gray space that I may leave tonight. We start all of this, like our mission statement doesn't change because we're in a global pandemic. Our job is still to educate students to be productive and ethical and engaged in a global society. In addition to our district's mission, I added the CAPS equity statement, which speaks about making sure that we work to achieve equity across all different types of learners. And that doesn't change when we go into a hybrid environment or a remote environment, or even a full in-school environment that all children may have trouble accessing. Our job is to do the best we can to reach all of our students. And it's not changed because we're in a global pandemic. If anything, it's more important that we create equitable schools. Again, our theories of action don't change. We set out a couple years ago to foster schools that are welcoming and inclusive. I already talked a little bit about the calendar. We need to make sure that our schools are welcoming, whatever that looks like. If we open in a full school environment, or a full hybrid environment, we still need to or a full remote environment, we still need to make sure that our schools and our classes are as welcoming as possible to students. It's more important than ever that we align our assessment to the curriculum, and that we have a good handle on our curriculum as we enter a time when it's going to be more fluid than it has in the past. We've worked hard on the communication and transparency. I hope you'll find that in tonight's presentation. That being said, those are continuums. So as people feel that they need more information or communication, please reach out to us and tell us what more information we can provide or what pieces of this you feel can be more transparent. And our students, our seniors last year graduated in a remote environment, and our incoming seniors are going to enter into a year that maybe we're better prepared for than the seniors we said goodbye to last year, but they're still going to go somewhere after high school, and we need to help prepare them at whatever grade they're at for whatever comes next. As far as the information timeline goes, so June 29th, which feels like an eternity for some of us, is when these guidelines were officially released. While some of the work that went on started long before June 29th, and really back in March and April, some of these conversations began. The guidelines that came out on the 29th were significantly different than in several areas than we had expected. And so there was some pivoting and some changing that happened, but that's when we started more formalized work across the district. And that began on July 1. Today is July 20th, and on the 24th, we need to submit this plan to the state. The state of Connecticut has made it clear that they are not approving plans, that the district's expected to submit one, that I'm expected to update it and keep it current. But right now, there's a lot of questions around which criteria may have some flexibility and which do not. I know that I haven't seen it yet, but I know the commissioner was on today answering some of those questions. I feel that our plan meets the letter and the spirit of what the state is asking us to do. But on July 25th, I fully expect that there will be something that will need to be adjusted. And we will continue to make those adjustments and keep the community and the board appraised of that. So our committee that worked and collaborated to create this plan. So we had 74 members of the school district. They made up every grade, every school, every lens that our students meet with. About 50% of our committee are residents of Region 15. And so when we talk about not only our teachers, but these are also parents and residents in the community. 90% of that committee were parents. So when they experienced the spring and look at entering in the fall, they're not just doing that through the lens of an educator, but also a parent. Just under 1,300 years of combined educational experience were contained within those 74 people. And while I did tell the joke earlier today, my 13-year-old thinks that at least 1,000 of those years are me alone. And about 1,000 of those years were Region 15 employees. They've been working here collectively for millennia. So when we talk about this plan, it was not built in a vacuum. It was not built without the educators who understand our students and our communities actively involved in putting this plan together. In addition to those 74 people, we've consulted with several different medical advisors. We've met with state leaders from across the state. We've met with school districts, not just in the United States, but internationally. We talked with folks in Europe and in Southeast Asia that have been opening schools ahead of us. We had multiple updates from different legal advisors on some of the things that are facing school districts. We've talked to transportation contractors, and the parent survey that we sent out had almost 8,000 comments. And that, in addition with the 1,000 comments from students, really helped paint a picture of where parents are at and helped inform the work of this committee. I put this disclaimer at the beginning, and I can promise you this is the last slide also of the presentation, that again, these guidelines are just those, and they were written based on what we know today. These are going to change. I fully expect that the landscape that we will be existing within 2 weeks from now, 4 weeks from now, 6 weeks from now, could potentially be very different than where we're at today. And some of this plan isn't just about having a plan, it's providing a strong enough base so that we can adjust based on where we're at. And we have a group of very knowledgeable people who are immersed in this work, who are going to be able to help make very informed decisions about how we have to adjust to whatever, well, to most whatever comes. I'll be careful because I don't think back in March, if I said whatever comes, that we quite knew this was coming. the state plan has 3 levels of planning. It's very possible that we will open in any one of these. While I think the most conversation is had maybe about the in-person conversation, this is a plan, and we have a structure in place for each of the 3 scenarios. But at this point, I would say it's premature to be 100% confident on any one of these, as far as which one our students will experience in September. So the in-person one means that the community spread and the infection rate locally is low enough where we can have 100% capacity in our schools, that we can run our buses with 100% capacity. That being said, it would be expected that all students wear masks. By controlling unloading and reloading, we would load buses back to front. So the first students on would start in the back, and then there would be no students passing by each other. And then you would unload the bus kind of in the reverse of that. Students and staff would wear face coverings. Again, this is not a district decision. This is a statewide mandate for schools to open with staff and students wearing face masks. There would be restrictions and reorganizations of courses that have large group gatherings, like physical education, or courses where there might be excessive moisture put into the air, like choral program or a band program. I think what you'll find is that we worked really hard to preserve these programs and at least the spirit of these programs, even again in a compromised state, as opposed to saying that we just can't do that. Reducing student travel, I'll talk a little bit about this tonight and how you reduce travel in the buildings to use as much outdoor space as possible. The one-to-one access, we're going to talk about a little bit, well, a lot tonight, that we do not have student to technology ratio of 1-to-1. I know the district's talked about it in the past, but when we have students that we're going to move back and forth, most likely between school and home, between in-person and remote learning, and even when they're doing in-person learning, limiting the need to share devices between students and to clean them when that happens, pretty much require that we move to a one-to-one student environment. That students can have access to their learning materials. We used Google Classroom in the spring. I would say there was a massive spectrum of where we were as a district and comfort zones and how it was structured. That's going to run extremely differently, and it will be a core district app going into the fall. The sanitizing and cleaning protocols will be different, as will needs for new things like mask breaks that haven't been scheduled in schools before. And before, I've made analogies to other kind of events that have forced us to restructure. And you know, several years ago, we had to move to put in lockdown drills in. Masks and mask break are a different concept, but similar in a new thing for students to learn. And there's a lot of questions about what extracurricular activities and sports are going to look like. So the short answer is that the sports are driven mostly by the CIAC. They're the governing body for athletics in the state of Connecticut. And we expect that they will continue to inform and make decisions on that. And that no decision we make will be done Region 15 specific. My current thinking is that other after-school activities will follow suit. So if athletics are able to happen, then we will work hard to take other after-school activities and follow the same guidance. But if the state chooses or finds that fall sports cannot run, then I would say that we would follow suit also with extracurricular activities. So that's model 1. Model 2 is a hybrid. The hybrid model poses the most questions and I think has the most guidance needed across the state as far as how this is interpreted. So the loose interpretation is that they would be reduced capacity. So we would, to the extent possible, reduce our student population on a day-to-day basis by 50%, and students would attend 2 days a week in school and 3 days a week remotely. So 50%, and I have a schedule that I'll show you later on. The same thing with our buses, we would reduce them by approximately 50%. And then the rest are pretty much the same as the in-person, that when you're in school, whether it's under a hybrid or an in-person, whenever you're on the bus, you need to wear masks. We're going to reduce and restrict student travel to the extent possible, use outdoor space as much as possible. Where the things change a little bit is that students would access Google Classroom. There would be parts of that would be synchronous and parts that would not be synchronous. We would still serve food services, both to students that are in and make it available to students who are out on remote learning on those days. We would follow whatever guidance the CIAC said. I do think, just being honest, that if we're in a hybrid environment, I don't know how we can reduce school by 50% and still run extracurricular activities. That hybrid model will most likely be driven by the community spread rate in as close to the region as possible. And again, this is where you get into, that won't be necessarily our decision. That would be informed by epidemiologists and health directors. The all remote is that all students are home. There's no busing. Again, a blend of synchronous and asynchronous. And when I say that, it means that every student would have synchronous learning every day. However, we would have some elements that would be asynchronous, because what we learned is that there are a vast number of families that need flexibility in their learning. So if the only opportunity for you to learn is to log on at 8:20 for your math lesson, and that's your only opportunity, that we're going to leave some students behind. So we still need to have a blend of synchronous and asynchronous. Again, the Google Classroom structure, that is going to run K-12. It will look different if you're a kindergartner than if you're a high school student. And part of our teaching at the beginning of the school year will be directly for our youngest learners on how to access some of these tools, but will also be on how to make things a little simpler for parents of our youngest learners who have additional burdens of having to interact with students who aren't going to be independent. We have a good handle right now for the equity piece of which families in our communities don't have access to the internet. And we'll work with those on a case-by-case basis. And of course, if we're all remote, there are no extracurricular activities or sports. Our learning options. So learning activities will be designed by school personnel, teachers. This is where it gets a little more nuanced. So one of the directives of the commissioner and the governor is that families will have the choice whether or not they want to come to school when we're in the full in-school model or in the hybrid model. Families will be able to choose whether or not they keep their child home, and without any type of like attendance penalty or anything like that. And students will still be able to access their learning. So this gets a little more nuanced to having a conversation like this, because if you're a kindergartner, that looks very different than if you're an AP physics student. But we have lots of pieces in place now. And in some cases, there may be the ability to stand up specific classrooms for students who are learning and give them a specific teacher. In other cases, we need to be able to be flexible within our class setting. So if you're a student whose parents quarantine, for example, but you're not sick, I don't want to pull you out of a second grade classroom that you've been a part of and give you an online teacher and a new structure. So in that case, you may stay with your teacher and remote into the classroom, but you wouldn't necessarily remote in from 9:30 in the morning till 2:30 in the afternoon. There would be, and we have some samples here, you know, at 10 o'clock is going to be the phonics lesson. You're going to come in at that time and you're going to get the phonics lesson, but then you would go back offline and maybe come back at 11 for a math lesson. So we'll go through some of that. And I know that as we get closer to the school year, some of those things will be more specific. I also think there's a lot of conversation around the different reasons that a student would be learning remotely and the different amounts of time that students would be learning remotely for. So again, this is the part that we have the most conversation about. And then the third option is, and this is an option available to families all the time, that if you really feel that the remote learning or the hybrid really isn't going to work for you as a family, you have the ability to withdraw your student from our schools and homeschool them in whatever path or direction. The piece about that is once you make the decision to homeschool, you are withdrawing your student from the school district, and you are responsible for their education, which again is an option that's always available to our parents. But moving back and forth in this environment may be harder for families, and the childcare option, that the hybrid model I'll talk a lot about, is I think going to be a challenge for families with childcare. So this is what a sample in-person schedule looks like. And what I said at the beginning about a compromised structure is that we're not adding time to the school day. So transition is going to take longer. Arrival and dismissal is going to take longer. We have to build in mask breaks. Lunch is going to take longer with transition. So students are going to have less face-to-face time. Again, I would continue to argue that that's even a compromised face-to-face environment is still better for most students than pure remote. So the high school schedule would see increased instructional blocks, but fewer per day. And so what that allows for is reduced staff travel and reduced student travel. So they're seeing a smaller cohort of people each day. It doesn't eliminate that. They're not going to be with the same teacher all day, but they will have fewer transitions. And the idea of cohort is really about contact tracing. So should something happen, we know these are the people that this person came in contact with today, and we can go and do the contact tracing. And when I say we, I really mean the healthcare professionals, because the school district is not doing contact tracing. We're not qualified or structured to do that. Professionals will do contact tracing. The elementary is a similar sample of what it would look like when kids come to school. And you'll see, again, instructional blocks. One of the pieces with the specials at the elementary is that we would kind of chunk them together or block them together, so that if you had PE or physical education or art or music, instead of having a different special every day on a 6-day rotation, you would have the same teacher for 12 days at a time. So you'd have art every single day for 12 days, or approximately 12 days, and then you would have PE every day for 12. So that teacher isn't seeing the entire school in a 6-day rotation, but a finite fixed number of students every couple of weeks. One of the biggest challenges with the elementary is the way that we run recess. And I think when we talk about compromised school district, this is a challenge, and I think it's a significant one for families of elementary age students. So currently, students are dropped off at 8:40 and they go to morning recess, and they go into the classroom around 9 o'clock. We cannot run morning recess at the elementary schools. There's no way for us to take the entire school and bring them indoors in a common space, which is what happens now, any day there's inclement weather. And so we're going to need to shift arrival time for students. So the buses are going to arrive at the elementaries, or current thinking is buses will arrive at elementaries at 9 o'clock, and that parent drop-off would start at 9:15. Which is a significant shift of about a half an hour for families in the morning. But again, unloading students and getting them into the classroom is going to take some time. We cannot kind of put all the students on the playground or inside the school at the same time. When we do recess now, it's by grade level, so there's a fixed number of students, and we're able to manage that. But to put all 300 students in the same spot is going to be massively complicated, and we don't have the staff or the space should the need arrive to bring them inside. And so our current thinking is, and this is why it's here tonight, is I want parents to start to be able to process and make at least plans should this need to happen. If there's a solution that we had not thought of yet that we can find, we will do what we can. Middle school, again, this is the in-person schedule. So you'll see things like maybe some extended blocks. This, for the most part, runs more similar to how they are today. A hybrid piece, and again, this is the one that has the most conversation happening around it. So cohort A, you'll see in yellow, would come in Monday and Tuesday, And cohort B would be 100% remote learning. They would not be in school, they would be online. Wednesday, everybody would be home. All the students would be on remote learning. And then Thursday and Friday, it would switch. So if you were home on Monday and Tuesday, you'd be in school on Thursday and Friday, and vice versa. This model would happen. Right now, our thinking is when the community spread started to move in a direction that was higher than it is now. How much higher? I can't answer that question right now. But there would be a need for that Wednesday where we could clear the schools, increase the airflow, reduce new people coming into the building, clean everything, and make sure that there was some space between the two different cohorts. Currently, the way we're looking at cohorts is they'd be by geography. And so we would take certain streets and bus runs in town, and that would be cohort A and cohort B. And this way, if we did need to do any contact tracing, if families did need to create some type of collaborative for childcare, we can then also use the buses. So if we don't do it by geography, it would mean that we're sending buses all over the entire district. Where if we do it by streets, we can double the number of buses in each geographic area and then have the number of students. So we couldn't start modeling this until we rolled over our calendar year and enrolled all the kindergartners, kind of exited all the seniors and moved all the students to their new grades. So that happened last week. And now we've started modeling. So this is the thought process of where we're going. I just can't at this point say that's a definite until we run some more scenarios. One of the things that's important to know about this is this hybrid schedule of the split cohorts and the Wednesday all remote is the model that all of Western Connecticut is looking at right now. So for our staff that work in other districts, or sorry, our staff that live in other districts, or our parents that work in other school districts, they are looking to all run the same. So New Milford, Brookfield, New Fairfield, Newtown, Bethel, and Ridgefield, I don't know that it's committed to it yet, are working to commit to this same hybrid schedule. And then there are a few districts in Litchfield County that are also trying to commit to this. So that, again, the places where our staff works will try and lives will try to stay at least consistent across the region. So now we talk about remote learning. So this would mean that all students are home. There would be daily synchronous lessons. Some of those might be whole class. Some of those might be small group. Again, depending on the grade level you're in. We would balance the need for routine in our students and our parents' lives and the need for direct instruction with the practical limitation of students aren't going to log on if I'm a high school student at 7:30 and be on direct till 2:30 in the afternoon. Again, there's some stamina, grade level is going to look a little different. The courses you take may impact that. For example, if you have a 2-hour block of time at the high school, there might be 30 to 50 minutes of direct instruction, but then there may be some small group learning that happens in a different environment. Could be online, maybe it's on the phone, maybe it's independent, and then maybe some regroup at the end. Last year, when we had students remote, we did not have the licensed software to be able to provide medical grade supports, things like OT and physical therapy and occupational therapy to students remotely. Our software was not HIPAA compliant. That's been corrected, and we can now provide therapeutic services through video conferencing to any student in the district that needs it. So this is what remote learning could look like at the high school. Again, these are working models that our teachers are developing and could evolve. But you'll see that the period structure is similar, and again allows for students to have multiple classes, and that each teacher, in addition to their class time, has some office hour time where they can support individual students. The periods would be synchronous. They would take attendance. The expectation is that students would be there, again, unless they fit some other category that we would work towards some type of asynchronous support. But they would be expected to attend kind of their class at that time. At the elementary schools, similar. There were, again, this is a sample. This sample comes from a learning model that came out of Columbia. We have not necessarily adopted this model yet in our elementary schools, and it may look slightly different, but it's a sample of what might happen at our elementary. You'll see there's block times for students to log in. And again, at kindergarten, grade 2, and 5th grade, this might look different based on where families are at and how much stamina or independence students have. And our high school or our middle school model will be most likely some blend between these two, where there will be scheduled time every day where students are expected to log in. Currently, we do attendance a little different at the middle school than we do at the high school. And there's some other pieces that may need to be adapted, but every student will have synchronous learning throughout the school day. When you talk about transportation, currently we're in, well, I should say last February, we were in that green place where buses ran as they've run for 50 years. We're gonna most likely, if we open school, in that low status where we can fill the buses up, but every student is gonna have a mask. We have those loading restrictions, the windows will be open, airflow will be at a high rate. The air turnover transition will be very high, and at least the medical experts that have been advising us feel that that is a pretty safe condition for transportation. And then if the community spread gets higher, we would move to that reduced capacity on our buses. The expectations are that from the state guidelines are that we have synchronous and asynchronous learning each day in our schools. Our plan is provided for that. I think our teachers have really worked to find ways to introduce a structure that will work within our schools. For our families, those 8,000 comments we got from parents really helped to shape the work that happened in our committee. We started collaborative planning across the district last spring, and that's something that we've made a commitment to as a district. And the expectation is that our schools and our content areas keep those structures in place so that teachers plan collaboratively and our learning looks very similar, regardless of where you go to school in this district. Consistent expectations that we're going to have students that push in and out of classrooms for a variety of reasons, that our expectations have to be consistent. One-to-one device, we're going to talk later tonight about how we make that happen. But it's an expectation of us as district leadership that we cannot run a remote or even really any of the three models if students don't have direct access to technology. Having students share, back in December and February, it sounded like a really good idea to put one cart of Chromebooks in every classroom and get us almost to a one-to-one student ratio. However, in the current environment, that's no longer a feasible model, and students do actually need to have their own. That K-12 will have access to Google Classroom, that students will be trained, that it will be consistent among teachers and disciplines to the extent possible, so that parents at home who are helping students at multiple grade levels or even with multiple courses can expect consistent ways to communicate, to turn in assignments, to where to find assignments. That work's happening now and will be communicated with parents and students as we get closer to the school year. And most likely you'll see some video training and your students will bring home what those things look like. Grading will be similar to pre-COVID. So that the pass-fail conversations that took place in the spring, again, were an initial reaction to a global pandemic that nobody had time to prepare for. And there was a lot of conversation and debate as to whether or not that was a positive or a negative, and whether or not it was supportive of students. But again, those were all conversations that happened in an emergency environment. This is an environment that we have more time to plan for and can be more deliberate, and we can't have, especially high school students, for an indeterminate period of time, survive and exist in that environment. So there will be a return to more consistent or more traditional grading practices. There's going to have to be some flexibility in those practices as students push in and out of school for a lot of different reasons, but that will be consistent to the extent possible across grades and departments. These are the calendar changes that I've already talked about tonight a little bit, that grades 1 through 12 and pre-K would start September 1st. Kindergartners would come September 2nd. The early release days at the beginning of the school year. And again, like I said, school's going to look different when kids come back. We think that there needs to be some time for them to transition. And if we don't do it on these early release days, then it's going to take, we're still going to do it. So it's going to be full days of school, and students are going to be asked to learn all of these things, create that stamina on a full day. And then at least the proposal right now would be September 8th would be back to that full day of school. I talked about this shift in professional development days for staff. And I really think that we modify and adjust and relearn on almost a daily basis. And I think when we take 3,400 students or some percentage of those and bring them back into our schools, that the first couple of days are going to be full of conversations about that worked as planned, this needs to change, that went better than expected, this went more challenging than expected. We're going to have those conversations. This is the calendar that I showed you a little while ago. Curriculum shifts. So we need to take and make some space in next year's curriculum. And some of that is going to be to reteach or support what was sacrificed or compromised in the spring. And some of that's going to be taking a hard look at what we teach in next year's expected curriculum, and whether or not every student needs that, or whether we can adapt and start to individualize some of the instruction. Last spring, we had about 600 students participate in our volunteer pilot on the NWEA assessment for reading and math. That information informed some of the work that we've already done on changes to next year. And as we enter the fall, again, not in the first week of September, but early on in the year, we're going to have all students participate in that assessment so that we get a individualized understanding of where their strengths are and where their challenges lie. Back in March and June, March through June, we already started on looking at our K-8 language arts curriculum and our math curriculum, and most of the work around revised scope and sequence has already been completed. Currently, some of the summer curriculum that's happening is looking at building those common assessments so they happen across districts and across grade levels. The group that's developing consistent Google Classroom structures is already meeting, and part of the professional development for staff when they return in the fall will be to build or restructure those Google Classrooms so they're consistent. The first couple of days of school are broken out into these 4 training pieces. Social emotional health. One, we need to make sure our staff, there's a lot of anxiety out there that we need to value and honor and adjust. And if our staff aren't prepared to enter, then they can't help our students to enter. So the first thing that we're going to do is that social emotional work to help our staff adjust, and then to be prepared to help our students enter school. There's technology training that needs to happen. There's curriculum training that needs to happen. Again, those 3 models offer different challenges in the classroom. And so there needs to be work done with teachers so that they're prepared in all 3 of those phases, as well as those students in between that push in and out. And then the equity piece. We started a conversation 2 years ago about creating welcoming and inclusive schools. The events over the summer and in the last few months have really sharpened the focus on that work and really heightened the value of bringing in those cultural competencies into our curriculum and making sure our teachers are able to communicate when issues of social justice arise in their classrooms. As a board, you were very progressive and really on the forefront of this work when we added that teacher in residency position for the sole purpose of that work. That's not going to change because we're in a global pandemic. Some of the digital tools that we've already brought in or licensed for the districts are listed here. This is a mix. Most of them are the tools that we started using in the spring. They were used in the district in different places, but not necessarily systemically across the district. So we've secured licensing to all of these digital tools, and they will be available to the grade bands listed on the screen at all times to students. So there's a couple different ways we're going to mitigate the virus. The first is through behavioral changes, things like social distancing, hand washing. Should the gloves are an interesting conversation, but if we need them, we have them. The use of face masks that cover the nose and mouth with breaks built in. Face shields, sometimes I'll talk a little bit about that and how we're using them in our extended school year program. The use of or creating stamina in the ability for those masks to be worn by students and staff, and people honoring the travel restrictions. This is a challenge right now in that it's, for the most part, unless you're an employee, it's voluntary. And so how people adhere to those travel restrictions, again, is a behavioral measure. And when you talk about social distancing, our current learning is that when you're in less risk environments, then you can use fewer measures, and the higher the environment in a risk situation, the more important. And what I mean by that is if you can be, say, outdoors and more than 6 feet away or 8 feet away, the importance of the mask is diminished. So when we talk about mask breaks, those are the types of environments we're going to move people to. When you're in environments that you're closer together, maybe with less airflow, it's more important for people to be masked and for both people to be masked. The structural measures, this is the most amount of work happening in the district around all the things that we can structurally change to keep people safe. How we disinfect and clean the surfaces, reducing the sharing of materials, whether that's Chromebooks, whether that's a box of crayons, scissors, whatever a student may touch in the school district, trying to reduce the need for them to share that. Reducing the amount of visitors in our schools, again, to the extent possible. There are times when people are going to need to come into our schools. The fewer times we can have that happen, again, the more risk we reduce. So if you're a parent that has to drop something off, there'll be a place outside where you can leave it and then communicate inside and somebody will come get it. But when we can move events to a broadcast nature, when we can postpone them, and in some cases we may have to eliminate them. Creating distance in our classrooms, this work's already happening, but it creates some interesting challenges for us. So most of our elementary school students sit at tables. Most of those tables are not 5 feet wide and students sit right next to each other. So we're removing most of those tables and creating flexible dining areas for students with those tables where they can be placed in other locations in the school and spread out, because during lunches, students won't be able to have their masks on. So we need to make sure those tables are spread apart, which creates the need for flexible seating or desks to be brought in. As a school district, we're not looking to bring in furniture at a budgetary cost that is going to be not important to us or not needed 3 years from now. We want to make purchases that are smart during a global pandemic, but that have a long tail to them and can be used or repurposed when we're on the other side of this. So whether that would be low cost seating structures. Again, we're not going to buy things that aren't unsafe, but it may not be a desk designed to last 30 years. And I'll go into some examples when we get to the finance page. Replacing the water fountains with bottle filling stations. And in some cases, we can't replace our water fountains for whatever reason, complicated plumbing issues or the way they're installed. So those may just be decommissioned. Restructuring traffic flow, so moving students so that they're moving in certain hallways in one way, but not passing each other if we can help it at all. Again, in some schools that's easier than others based on the layout of the school. Allocating bathrooms so that, that certain grade levels may only have access to one bathroom, and the protocols for how students access it may change. I just talked about the mask breaks a little bit, creating large instructional spaces, airflow, increasing airflow, rooms with big windows or cross ventilation. Wherever we can, teachers will move instead of students. And when students have to move, to reduce the number of kind of permutations that students interact with. I talked a little bit about the program changes for Unified Arts. I am proud of the way our teachers worked through this and our administrators, because there are other districts being faced with shelving some of these programs for the short term. And I think we're working really hard to make sure there's value in all of the programs that we offer and that students aren't going to lose some of those. Lockers are things that students congregate at right now. Whether or not we can completely eliminate them, I think, is a school by school and maybe even a wing by wing kind of conversation within that school. This is the first time I've discussed urinals at a board meeting in my life. But whether or not we're going to decommission some of them and bathroom stalls and do every other one, so that, again, creating space where we can. I talked a little bit about the elementary impact of arrival, but there's going to be, while there won't be a time shift at the middle and high school because students already report right to their classrooms, it is going to take time and it is going to be slower. And students who get dropped off are going to probably use different entries than students that take the bus, and it's going to be staggered. So it's going to take more time. And the addition of the one-to-one devices, again, means that we don't have to have any students share a device. And then the supply piece. So currently in the district, our plan is to make sure that every classroom has a hand sanitizer pump wall mounted. We've already ordered large amounts of paper towels and tissues. The air dryers in all the bathrooms either are already or are in the process of being disabled. The turnaround time and production line of paper towels for us as a school district anyway is back to normal. So we can have 2 or 3 weeks out and we don't have to buy for the entire year currently. If that starts to shift, we'll adjust our purchasing structures. Already in the district, we have 600 packages of disinfectant wipes. Each wipe has 80 in a pack. We're going to put 2 per classroom. This is not how teachers are going to do primary cleaning or custodians. This is a supplemental. In the district, we already have 17,000 adult level 1 masks, and we have 16,000 children's masks in-house already. Again, our expectation is that many students and staff will have their own masks, and we'll have masks for those who need them, whether they get forgotten or contaminated or whatever. In addition, all staff will be issued a cloth mask, more similar to something like this. And we do have 1,000 face shields in the district. Current medical advice right now is that the face shield is a supplemental and that not all staff will need one, especially if they're not going to be in very close proximity to students. And they do not last forever. So some of that, it's not our intent right now to issue every staff member one, but to be selective in who needs it. But again, that's learning in progress and we'll adjust if we need to. We currently have 2 pallets of gloves. And our current thinking of the gloves, again, is there are specific times when people may need them. But the glove, if you touch something contaminated and then touch something else with the glove, that's really no different than using your hands. The practice around face shields, gloves, and face coverings are really ones that will be driven by local medical advisors. And our job is to support the direction that they point us in. Every classroom will have a sanitizing spray bottle with a sanitizing solution in it. Right now we have hundreds of gallons of sanitizing solution. It comes concentrate. And so we're not worried about the amount of supplies. We are far ahead of where we would need to be. Even if those start to become depleted, there's a long enough lead time for us to make sure that we will never run out. Every bus will have a hand sanitizer as well as the spray cleaner. So I debated whether or not I should even put this in here. So there's a big sample over this. This is not created by anybody in the state of Connecticut. This came from a model being used by another state. This will be created by the state of Connecticut. It will not be created by anybody in the district. But I do think it's important as a parent and as a staff member for you to understand how these things most likely will work. Is there will be a metric at some level as to how we move from a green, that would be our all-in model, to our yellow hybrid model, to our red all remote model. I can't tell you today what that metric's going to be and what threshold of community spread is going to move us from one to the next. And then in addition to that, what happens when a staff member or a student tests positive? What are we going to do as a district? We're going to have a decision tree, I expect, like this, but we don't have it today. And what does it mean? There's not going to be a one size fits all. So in the top there, it's going to be heavily dependent on the current community spread, when and where that person has been. This is where that contact tracing comes in. If there's one case in the school district, we may not shut down all of the schools. At the same time, there's probably a scenario where that might happen. What's the scope? What's the potential exposure? How many students could be impacted? How long should we shut down for? How fast is the turnaround of some of the testing that we're going to get back? All of those pieces are really decisions that are going to be driven outside of the school district. We can have plans in place. We can tell you what those plans are. We can tell you to the best of our ability what those decision matrix are, and we can tell you as soon as we know. But some of that, again, we're not going to do the contact tracing in the district. So that's going to be driven by factors outside of us. And the other piece is where we are in Connecticut is that there will be other school districts most likely answering these questions that we can learn from, just like we learned from Europe and Asia in the opening of school. They'll inform how we think about these practices. So our extended school year is a program that we run over the summer. And so we're already running school with students and staff in there. Now, I have to be clear, we only have about 100 students in this program. So it's not the same as opening schools with 3,500 students. But we have students in school during the summer wearing masks for a prolonged period of time. We have teachers in the district teaching today for prolonged periods of time with masks on, using transportation, taking mask breaks. And the students have exceeded where we felt that we were going to be. So we have procedures in place with staff receiving students in the morning. Again, teachers teaching in all different types, not staying 6 feet apart because they're both masked. Just like if you're in a doctor's office and someone's taking your vitals, they're closer than 6 feet. They're able to do that. We have protocols on how we're cleaning and changing information, how we're labeling things that have been used. So while this isn't the same, these are our teachers in school with our kids on a daily basis that we're learning from. And so that is informing how we're going to go forward, and going to scale is very different, but it'll be grounded in some of the things that we're learning now. So all this takes funding. And we made a commitment to the community we're not going to come back with that we can't do this within our existing budget. We're working very hard to keep within the promise that we've made and within the commitment that you've made as taxpayers with a fixed budget that's already passed. So one of the things we need to do is repurpose what we already have in our budget. So as I alluded to before, music's going to look different in some cases. So an elementary school band, instead of repairing instruments that students might be learning on, we can repurpose that to buy keyboards where all students can learn. And it's not the same as learning the trumpet, but there's safety in the fact that all students can learn to read music and all students can still learn basic instrumental practices. And we can do that cost neutral. When we look at the high school library is on a cycle to replace their furniture. And this was supposed to be an installment of that replacement. We're going to push that and defer that work. So again, we're not changing line items. This is money that was put in for furniture, but instead of library furniture, we will look for student desks. The student desk piece is there are still plenty of desks at Pomperaug High School that came from Southbury High School. I won't tell you when we stopped calling it Southbury High School, but those are really old desks. So we'll keep them for one more year, and then we can cycle those out as end of life. Earlier this year, we restructured our bond debt. That saved $50,000 in debt payments. Again, in that same line, we can roll that savings into a lease that we're going to talk about later tonight, and that will purchase the Chromebooks that we need. So at zero cost, zero additional cost to the taxpayer, it's already in the budget. It's already as a debt service payment. It's just repurposing the savings we received by restructuring that bond debt. In federal government, there is a COVID CARES dollar amount that the district received. That's $118,000. That's going to go to that software licensing. Some of the PPE equipment, the cleaning, the gloves, the masks, the shields, we expect will be reimbursable at 75% from FEMA. However, that application hasn't been approved yet, and we can't speak to 100% assurances that that's going to happen, but our current expectation is that at least a portion of that will come back to us. I feel this is important because as a family member, if you're watching tonight, I think these are the things that you need to be thinking about. And all of them are complicated and there's no guarantee, but I think these, as a parent, are the things that I have to work on as well. So elementary start time, our actual instructional start time is not going to change, but the elimination of morning recess means that arrival time will change, and that's going to impact families. The 4 early release days at the start of school, again, students are going to be coming home earlier than were planned. I do think that a partial day is still getting students in and better than no school at all on those 3 days. The hybrid and remote learning, I think, pose the biggest challenge to families because there are daycare issues if you are the parent of an elementary school child. And I can't tell you which days we're going to be hybrid, other than I will tell you before school starts if you're the Monday, Tuesday, or the Thursday, Friday cohort, but I can't tell you when those days are going to be needed or when we would switch to remote learning. And at this point, I can't even tell you how much time you're going to have in between. And so as a parent, you need to start thinking about contingency plans and what that's going to look like. We do hope that by kind of blocking those regionally, that there are opportunities for regional types of childcare structures to be in place. We are talking with BAS about creating some internal programs for parents. It's too early for me to tell you whether or not they're going to be able to stand those up yet, but we're working on that. And I think the idea of the geography for families may allow for some neighborhood-based collaboratives around childcare. But I do think that is the most complicated of all of this. The potential impact for extracurriculars, the parent contact information. So if you're listening tonight, most likely you've gotten contact to find this presentation. It's more important than ever to make sure your email addresses, phone numbers, and addresses are accurate in our school databases, because some of these things, that is how we're going to contact you. The daily monitoring of health is something that in Southeast Asia was pretty common. There's conversations, the state's trying an app now where people are reporting. I can't tell you where that's going to go, but I think that's something that you just have to start thinking about is every morning, it can't be, I'm not sure if you're not feeling good, so we're going to send you to school. Here's my disclaimer. Like I said at the beginning, all of this is based on what we know today, July 20th at 7:30. And this document will evolve as the national climate evolves, as the state climate, and as new information becomes available. So with that, I'll pause here and take some questions.
First, I'd like to say thank you, Josh, for all of this information. It is most definitely evident that a lot of work has gone into this. So thank you to everyone who helped put this together. I hope everyone can hear me okay. I know I was having a little bit of trouble with my Wi-Fi. Okay. So I see Heather Rogers has her hand raised up.
I also want to thank you all for all of that hard work putting that together. Just a quick question right off the bat. The cohorts, I know Josh had said that maybe they would be geographically mapped out so that you have certain areas would be A, certain areas B. Would that also work the same way for throughout the different schools? So elementary, middle, high school. So families would know that they had all, like for me, 4 kids, all on A or all on B. So that would be one question. And also if we can just make that such a major priority to let parents know as soon as possible which cohort they were in, even if we're not going right to that hybrid model, they would be able to reach out to their contingency plans, you know, family, friends, neighbors, daycares, to kind of put that out there and say, hey, we're on A. Is there any way that we can plan for that and have that information out as soon as possible?
That's exactly right. So by doing it by kind of bus route, and I say that like in my little italics, because it may not be by bus number, but like everybody on this street is going to be in cohort A, regardless if you're in kindergarten or 12th grade. And again, whether you ride the bus or drive yourself or take a parent, whatever bus you would be on for those exact reasons. And even when we start talking about alpha, there could be students with different last names in the same household. Like it's important for us, and that hybrid model is complicated, and we don't want families to have students on different days. So that's kind of a huge driver for those exact reasons, yes.
I think my question on that as well would be, I know that it probably gets a lot more complicated with high school students. So you may have, you know, classes, I don't know how you're going to do that. I don't want to start to figure that out myself, but maybe we would still have to be flexible and say that, you know, your child A is taking these classes and your child B is taking these, and maybe it doesn't work with A or B, you know, the same.
I should say all of our schools are designing it so that regardless if you're in the A, whether you're the in-school group or the out-of-school group, you have similar learning activities, or maybe exactly the same. For those reasons, and that's where, like, I think each building principal in the next few weeks will start to communicate some of those things out, because it's different based on where you are, you know, in the school district.
Fantastic, thanks.
Okay. Steve, you can go ahead.
Oh, okay. Hi, Steve Sirianni speaking. Again, thank you, Josh and team. Just appreciate all the work, just like my colleagues here have said. Couple questions. Josh, did you, in terms of purchasing either the PPE, I know you said it seemed like you have a lot already, but in purchasing any PPE that you might need, or even the Chromebooks to get us to 1-to-1, there's no, you haven't caught wind of any kind of shortages, or, you know, just, I mean, I know that can always happen, but as of now, you don't feel that's an issue?
So I would say the short answer is we're pretty confident that the materials that we're purchasing are readily available. Again, that could change if there's spikes in certain parts of the country. I do think that at least the level 1 masks, like the capacity as a world to produce them, is increased. Mr. Martino's on the phone pretty much every day with somebody, you know, and we probably get 50 emails from vendors a day with kind of what they have available. So at this point in time, it's pretty good. Like the lead time, I'm trying to think of some of the items that might have longer lead times that we would be looking at. So if we were looking at, like, for the nurse's office, some specific types of air filtering, or like the webcams that we're talking about using in some of the classrooms. Again, we're still in enough of a window where we don't think they're a problem. But the general PPE type safety cleaning stuff, has been really easy to order.
Okay, great. If the state says, we're at, the state determines the in-person or the hybrid or the full-time remote. That's really the gist of it. So even if we feel like we can be a green because we're all walking around and no one is sick, and the state says we're at yellow or hybrid, then we're at yellow. And then I guess if, there was some sort of outbreak specific to a school or something like that was really intense, then obviously we could, kind of go to remote, on our own. So I guess my question is, we're never going to be higher than the highest state level. Is that a good way of looking at it?
So, yeah, I mean, my hesitancy is that I don't know that it's clear yet that the state is going to make the determination on their own. Like, I think my working assumption right now is that it'll be somewhat of a collaborative piece, and it's not going to be across the state. So again, I don't speak for the State Department.
Yeah. Sure.
But I think that the commissioner and the governor, kind of where we were back in March, is that it may be more regionally based. That, like, when the March example of Lower Fairfield County saw high numbers of infection, where Eastern Connecticut did not have any or had minimal. So the state may not shut down everybody or move everybody to hybrid, but it may be some type of geographic. I just can't tell you how big kind of the circle of influence is and where the dividing line between your hybrid, your remote. I do know that, like, the state epidemiologist and the commissioner are working on those things. But I don't have that information. As soon as we have that information, we would share.
That's okay. I just when I'm just clarifying my understanding. And then with contact tracing, so let's just say there is some sort of outbreak, then you sort of hand that off to whoever in the state's handling the contact tracing.
Yeah, we have two local health districts that Region 15 is in, where Middlebury sits in the Torrington Health District and Southbury sits in the Pompano Health District. Both of those districts would be involved in contact tracing.
Okay. And then would it, I guess, I actually had time to listen to the governor's call today. I was just listening to it while I was at work, and someone did ask the question about, if we're in person full time, we don't expect teachers to like teach a full day and then like have some second shift to do, the remote learning piece for people who've chosen to stay home. So, or chosen to keep their kids home. Do you have any thought on how that would look?
Lots.
How much does it keep you up?
So I think, and again, we have very thoughtful teachers that were a part of this process. And I think you get into, there is some critical mass conversation. So for example, if I am a teacher who might have one section of Spanish 5, and I might have one student that's out, I may say, join your normal Spanish 5 class, and you're gonna just be remote as I teach my instruction. If I teach algebra, and we have 26 students across the district that are all algebra students that are all learning remotely, we may approach that differently. If I am a 7th grade social studies teacher and I might teach 5 sections of 7th grade social studies, but my 3rd period class is smaller, I might say to like 4 or 5 remote students, I want you to tune in at this time and I'm going to teach my lesson then. But that student may have conflicts at that time. So again, the thinking of many of our secondary and even some of the primary teachers were to have students join that class at that time, just like they would if they were a normal student. That's different than a family that says, we're not coming September through December and we're staying all remote. We may treat that slightly different because there isn't some in and out of the classroom. So again, I think there's a lot of conversation around what that looks like and even how to put students in different types of categories based on their instructional needs. And that may be different if the student has other needs within the district or other services that the district provides that we would adjust for. Okay. So I think the idea is we want that student to get all students to have the opportunity to be taught by our teachers. That's why you moved here. That's why we run our schools every day, for you to have contact with our teachers. And they're the best instructors that we have for your children. So what that looks like is evolving, but everybody has made a commitment that we understand that the educators in this district are the best people to teach your kids.
Okay, and
All right.
I've one,
Actually,
just,
Steve,
yeah.
look, I'm just going to try to spread it around the table just a little bit too. Shannon Cavallo had a question. Jeremy, can you unmute her?
Hear me?
Yep.
You're good.
I can hear
Okay.
you, Shannon.
Perfect. Okay, great. Thank you. So first, thank you for this. I realize this is a significant amount of work and effort from your team putting all of this together and trying to coordinate everything. So I have a question just because a lot of people have been asking me over like the last week or so about what happens with the before and after school program for parents who can't get their kids to and from school and still have to work on a regular schedule. Are we thinking that's going to run? Is that going to run differently? Because that will be a mix of students from all grade levels, different geographies throughout the town. Like or have we not gotten there yet on what will happen or if there will be before and after care?
So we have been in conversation with BAS. It's a service to our community that's really important. When we shut down schools, they existed really until they only had, I believe, 1 or 2 students left in the program. They were able to stay open. It's the part of the challenge is that the BAS program falls under the Office of Early Childhood, not the State Department of Education. And currently, the Office of Early Childhood has different guidelines that they run daycares and childcare than are the guidelines we've been given as schools. So we're committed to work with BAS to provide services for families. There have been a significant number of daycares that have closed. There's a significant backlog of seats that parents need for their children. And we have a lot. To tell you exactly how it's going to run now, I think you get into some questions about like that all-in versus the hybrid. Obviously, the remote's kind of I shouldn't even say that. The remote, when we went remote in March, BAS stayed active for, I don't remember exactly, but I want to say 3 or 4 weeks. I'm looking kind of at Mr. Martino here, if you remember. But it was 3 or 4 weeks after we shut down as a school district, our schools, that they stayed open. So the remote one is probably a little harder to speak to, but certainly the all-in. So I guess I don't have a full answer for you other than we recognize the importance and value of BAS, and we're working to find a way to keep them open. The challenges of like elementary recess are going to be some of the same challenges that BAS faces. But again, their rules are a little different. And then for the hybrid, we are talking about standing up a BAS run program at a facility outside of one of our schools that would be available to parents. But there's a lot of questions on basically having a shelved childcare providing service that you only run really on a moment's notice when needed. So like, how do you staff that? How do you allocate resources and space for a program that might only run once in a while? So we're working through some of those things right now, and we'll have some answers. I just don't think they're going to be available to families in the next 2 weeks, but we will certainly have them as we get closer to the opening of school.
Thank you. I see Heather Dwyer also had some questions.
Thank you. And I also just wanted to echo, thank you to everyone who put in so much work to this. And I really appreciate that the committee contained a lot of the staff who are going to be responsible for implementing this plan. So I just wanted to say thank you for that. And I hope that they feel well represented. My questions were, I appreciate you shared the email address where people can email questions. And I think that will be really helpful because this is a lot to digest. And I'm sure that people, as they kind of think through their own individual situation, are going to have a lot of questions. But what I am hearing is that there's a lot that we can't necessarily answer from a health and safety and medical perspective. So I wonder, are those questions best directed towards the school district, or do we have other, do we have a way to ask like the local health authorities some specific questions as well?
Yes, I mean, so I would say that the local health directors are accessible. I think that we'll be meeting with them in the next couple of weeks. We talk to them, they have our plan. You know, I don't know, we can see if they'd be available to the board, or even if we filter, we certainly could take some of the questions if people want to submit them. You know, some of the more specifics about contact tracing or some of those kinds of questions and ask them. I am conscious that our local health directors are spread super thin right now, but some of the questions you're asking aren't just local health directors. When you start talking about like that hybrid metric, that's not one our health directors are going to build. It's going to come from state epidemiologists. Again, we have access to those people. I also think that some of this information is going to have to be released at a statewide basis. So if you have questions, send them in to that website and we can collect them, channel them to the right people and see if we can get answers to them.
So along that same line, you know, people are going to be synthesizing this information. They're going to be making decisions for their family. Is there a decision time where people are going to have to inform the school district what their plans are?
So we're going to send out another parent survey in a couple of weeks. I agree with you. You know, we sent out a parent survey in June that asked questions like, are you planning to send your student to school? Are you planning to ride the bus? 2 weeks from now, parents are going to be in a very different place, and many of them, than they were a couple of weeks ago. I don't know which direction they've moved in, but you know, I just think that everything's contextual, and so we're going to ask that question again. Some school districts are sending that out every week. I think that might be like saturation, you know, but we may send it out closer. And again, the hard part about that is the way that this is structured and the way the guidelines from the state currently exist. Parents can make that decision as often as they want based on whatever criteria they choose. So while as a school district, especially around things like transportation, it would be helpful for our planning. Right now, the plans that we're making assume all of our students are returning, and then we can adjust down. If I build classes, or we as a school district start to build like class rosters based on that survey, and then parents change their mind, I don't want to build a class with a certain number of students in it and have to adjust up. It's far easier for us to build assuming everybody comes. And if we have extra space, that's great. But at the same time, if you're a parent that says, gee, the first couple of days of school, I'm not comfortable coming, but you know what? And this is what happened in a lot of European schools. Again, this was months ago, so everything's different. But, you know, they opened schools and a whole lot of parents kept students home. And then after a week or two, their comfort level started to increase. And so they wanted to participate. I don't want to say to families, I'm sorry, you told us on, you know, August 8th that you weren't coming back and I don't have a spot for you. You know, that's not something that's really even possible for us as a school district. Every parent has, you know, FAPE is the federal law, free access to public education, you know, and we have to abide by that. So, you know, even if we send out a survey, again, I would ask parents to be honest where you're at then. And when we send it out, tell us what you're thinking. But we're going to try and build a school district. And again, one of the luxuries I think that we have in our school district is that we can do this. Plenty of our peers in the state don't have enough space for the students they have. They're at classes of 27 and 28. When we adjusted and like our elementary class size is relatively small. So there's many classrooms that if we put 16 students in there, creating space in there is not an issue for us. If that same classroom had 27 kids in it, I wouldn't be able to create space. So We have the ability to build a plan that allows for everybody to come back and then adjust down if we need to.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, Sharon Attic.
Hi, this is Sharon Attic. Again, I want to just echo the sentiments of my colleagues. Thank you so much to you and your entire team for putting this plan together and for proactively addressing so many questions. And I apologize because I asked many of them and clogged up a lot of your inbox. So one thing I was hoping you could maybe speak to it, and I appreciate that the information related to the decision tree, should a student or teacher become positive, will be dictated by others outside of this team. Could you speak a little bit, just building on the conversation related to communication, over what will be communicated to parents as well as to educators about what their responsibilities are as far as informing the school district and vice versa? I recognize there's complications with HIPAA and all those types of things, but you know, that's definitely an area, you know, I'm interested to understand, you know, what happens, who needs to be informed, how does that happen? And similarly, if a teacher becomes ill, could you speak a little bit to how the substitute teachers will be trained on these protocols? I fully appreciate and recognize that you're pulling up those professional development days early in the school year to train and onboard your existing staff and your teachers, but what happens midstream with substitutes when they're traveling to different classrooms?
Good questions. So the first question was really about communication specific to positive cases in the district.
Yes. So if a child becomes positive, you know, how would a parent and to whom should a parent inform the school district or does that happen through the contact tracing through the state? Similarly, if a teacher is ill, would a message go out to those students that teacher is ill? You know, with HIPAA and all those different things, I'm just trying to understand from a reactivity time, how can people be best informed? So if there is risk, it's contained.
So like all of this, there's some contextual pieces to that, you know, and some of it comes down to, you know, where the exposure and belief, like did it originate in the schools? Did our nurses isolate the child or the adult and were they sent to testing from us? Or did they self-quarantine because they were outside? So, I mean, there are some contextual pieces. And I look a little bit to Dr. Sharetto. She's been working the most closely with some of this. And really, when I talked about our extended school year program, all of these protocols are in place today and how we run that program. So I don't know, do you want to speak to that a little bit? I mean, I can, but you're probably a better authority than I am.
Sure. So again, like Josh was saying, it is contextual. We need to kind of know like where it happened, how we gain knowledge of it. So if families find this out at home and they call in their child absent, or you would call the school nurse and then we would have those protocols. However, if a child or a staff member were to become ill in school, there's a lot of it depends. So we need to know, did everyone have their mitigating measures on? Were there masks? Were you close to people? Were you, inside the building, outside the building? So there's so many things that we would have to go through. And then as far as notification, it really depends on all that prior, if there's notification or not, because there's still confidentiality related to all of this regardless. But if there is a high risk factor to people who have been in contact, then we would have levels of notifications depending. So as Mr. Smith had said earlier, it could be, if it's a small type infection and no mitigating factors, there might not be any notification, as opposed to, say if it's a family of 4 and they're all positive and they're in different schools, and may end up being a district response depending. So it really is depending on the honesty and trust between families and the school system and the reporting of what's happening, and our trust within the building that we're properly utilizing our mitigating measures and reporting what happens in each scenario.
And
so from a simplistic perspective,
sorry.
I'm sorry, from a simplistic perspective though, if someone is ill and I'm a parent, it's my child, let's say, I would have very clear guidance coming from the region over who I needed to notify at the school, right? And I think that seems like such a naive question, but I'm coming from the perspective of, I currently, I'm like a newbie, right? My daughter would be entering kindergarten. So I'm thinking it in terms of, people who have children in the school system, they're familiar with these policies and procedures. This throws an additional kind of caveat and twist into things. And how is that information conveyed so that people know who to contact?
So I'm sure at the beginning of the school year, we'll send that information out again to everyone, because anytime your child's sick, if you're calling them out of school, you would be calling them in. We will now be asking, of course, we can't mandate it, but we would be asking families to tell us why. Why are you out sick? Because there's still going to be colds. There's still going to be flu. There's things, but at least we have some knowledge about what the illness is. So say perhaps you said your child had a fever. Well, tomorrow when we talk to you and you still have a fever, it would say perhaps you would think about talking to your pediatrician at this point or something of that nature. So it's really about the communication, and we will definitely make sure families know the point of contact if your child is sick.
I think to further kind of talk about it, so that's where you get a little bit into the community spread. So when you have community spread of less than 1% and a child has a fever, there's a high probability that that is not a COVID fever and it has some other, childhood fever associated. If you're at 10% or 25%, that's a very different scenario. Again, if we're at 25%, I don't speak for the State Department, but I'm assuming if we're at 25%, we're going to be in a remote learning environment. But I think that's where kind of all the factors and why a lot of those notification protocols are not going to be school district independent, that they will be made in communication with our local health advisor and certainly the local health district. When it comes to whether or not we're going to do contact tracing, our first calls are to the local health director, and then they inform that. And vice versa, because they're doing contact tracing. If there's a student or a family in one of our schools that they feel poses a risk, they're going to contact us. It's a little nuanced, because we haven't, again, kind of gone through that outside of last March. And so while that happened a lot in Lower Fairfield County, most of us were closed by the time the higher rates of infection encroached on this part of the state. So we learned from what happened in Lower Fairfield County and that's where those health directors have a lot of experience. And they've been doing all the contact tracing. If you remember, there was a Woodbury case right around when we shut down that we talked a lot and learned from how they manage that.
Would it be possible for you to speak to the substitute teaching?
Oh, sure. Sorry. So as of today, we've created like what we call permanent subs. So we have substitutes in our buildings on a regular basis, but we've basically assigned or are in the process of assigning certain substitutes to certain buildings that they report to every day. For your 100% reason of they're going to train, contact tracing, they know the teachers, they know the curriculum. Part of the consistent planning that we talked about earlier in my presentation was so that if a teacher, especially it gets a little more complicated when you get to some of the electives at the high school level where we don't have multiple sections. But for any subject or grade where we have multiple teachers, if our Google Classrooms are consistent, then if a teacher is out, and this happened even in the spring where a teacher was ill and wasn't able to work on lesson plans, other grade level people could help support that. So the sub wasn't going in and having to create all of their own lessons and content on their own, that there's a collaborative that can help when there's a hole, we can help fill it together. So that's to some extent. We did change our protocols really last September or October, maybe, around how we onboard substitutes and increase the amount of training. Obviously, this is now going to have to be a part of that. We have the Safe School platform, which is an online training platform that we use for staff. It's available to our substitutes, and a lot of this information is either already there or will be there, both some of the more general and some of the more specific. And at some of the larger schools, we may provide more permanent subs. So I think those are short term. I think one of the challenges we have now is what the demand's going to be, and what the resources are going to be. So the state has changed some of the substitute guidelines, which should increase the number of people available to be substitutes. But to your point, we want to be specific about how we try to assign substitutes to locations where we can minimize the number of people going around the district day to day. So again, some of this also may be staff absentee patterns, where if staff are out for 10 and 15 days, that's a different type of substitute assignment than today you're going to go to this classroom and tomorrow you're going to go to that one. But at least we now have building subs, so we know that they're not traveling from school district to school district or building to building.
And Josh, may I just add, this is Jessica Schrodo again. We do have onboarding for our substitutes right now through Dr. Chipetta's office, but which we are talking about creating health and safety videos so that we can add that to the onboarding so that people can understand our mitigating measures during this time.
Thank you. Steve, I'm going to circle back to you. Do you still have questions?
Actually, yes and no. So they were asked by other board members. So that was convenient. Although I would just now, in listening to the response regarding contact tracing, I guess I'm more confused now than maybe when I was. But I'm going to just take it with a grain of salt that it's still, you're still sort of working through, you know, what happens when you find out if someone has COVID in the school. I guess it depends on if they've disclosed it to you or if the health department discloses it to you, and what's the state of affairs in the whole state. And so I understand it's a big picture, I think.
I do think you'll see a decision matrix a little bit as we get closer.
Yeah.
And some of that will be laid out. Again, I think there's just some of that, and this is where cohorting and scheduling becomes important, because when Jessica said that the factors of the contact that students came in, proximity to someone who may have been or who was testing positive, again, if both people had masks on, if they were in an environment where it was controlled, I think we have a lot of situations now where you might have an infected person. And again, this isn't me telling you this. In the meetings we had with the infectious and pediatric doctor, talked about an example where a salon had two COVID positive
employees,
beauticians. Sorry, thank you. Yes, and both of them were COVID positive. Both wore masks. All of their clients had masks on, and there was no contamination. Nobody got sick. However, environments with a lot smaller numbers of people that are unmasked, the rate of infection is higher. So it really has a lot to do with those mitigating factors that you're able to create and the behaviors of people. And we're seeing that play out right now across the nation. And again, I am not the health expert, but we have a lot of these conversations, and all of the information that we're receiving is saying that if both people have masks on, that the infection rate and the potential for infection is extremely low. And in places where that's less likely, then you need to introduce other mitigating factors. And so that's all of this plan is built on those kind of two contingencies. Can we put the most mitigating factors in the most mitigating environment and create the least amount of risk for students and staff? And when those start to change, that's where you get to those hybrid and remote environments.
Thank you.
Heather Rogers had another question.
Hi, I just wanted to go back to Sharon's question about subs. And I know you had said that the state had changed the sub requirements a little bit. Even though they did that, can we still decide, or you still decide to hold the line to a higher standard, unless of course we're really in trouble and we really have a shortage, and say maybe still require an associate's degree or something to that effect?
Sure, locally we can always increase the amount of standards that's set by the state. I think kind of, and you alluded to it, if we have a very strong candidate pool, then I think we can, be more selective. And if the wheels start to come off, I think we'll have to reevaluate that. Our intent, and part of this is by creating an environment where we have consistent sub coverage in our buildings. It doesn't cost us a whole lot more to create a building sub, and it really is more beneficial to the employee in that they know where they're going every day. So we're going to wade through that a little bit. It does reduce the flexibility a little bit of substitutes being used across the district. But right now we feel that we need to provide that confidence in our schools that they have that.
Is there anyone else with questions?
Marion,
Yep.
Marion, Richard Spirtle here. Marion,
Yes.
listen, we keep going off the air. There was just silence there for about 2 or 3 minutes, and every once in a while, the host keeps muting me. Is there a problem with the sound? There's a problem with the sound quality, of course, but is there a problem with the electronics?
Nope, I think that was actually, Richard, my problem, that I had switched off from my Chromebook to my iPhone because I was having a hard time with my Wi-Fi. So I apologize for that.
But it's just not you too. It's even when Sharon was talking and when Josh was talking, just went completely blank as sound. Can you hear me?
Yes.
I could hear you. Yeah.
Right.
I didn't experience that, Richard. I don't know if maybe it's your Wi-Fi as well. Maybe you had like a temporary issue.
You did not experience no audio for about 2 or 3 minutes?
Not for 2 or 3 minutes, maybe for about 20 seconds right before you spoke now, like a little while ago.
Yeah, it's the same for me, Richard.
Yeah.
Do you have any questions now, Richard?
No, I don't have any questions. I just want to hear what's going on.
Okay. Does anyone else have any other, any board member have any other questions for Josh?
This is Sharon. I'd like to ask one more question if I may.
Sure.
And again, thank you. One quick question about the hybrid cohort model. Because of the challenges that you clearly have spoken to and with the complexities of that model, any thought or thinking that the curriculum would be made available ahead of time or posted to allow parents the opportunities to perhaps flex how some of that learning could be provided, i.e. supplement, because let's say the schedule is such that their child is unable to join on that synchronous time point?
Yeah, so I think part of the reason that it's so important that we create a consistent, accessible, I don't work for Google. I don't own any shares of stock in Google or anything like that. Google Classroom is a tool that is low cost and easily accessible by our staff, and they have the most knowledge of it. So that's why we're using it. But I think it's important for us to have all those structures in place so that we can have asynchronous learning activities for students who can't participate. We heard from a lot of families that wrote in about the challenges they faced. about family structures, financial structures, environmental structures, all kinds of things that were dependent on asynchronous opportunities for their students. And so it's important to us to protect those opportunities. So even in some cases, whether we have some recorded activities or pieces of that where students can access later, the materials to the extent possible to be available in either environment. And the way that Google Classroom works is we're going to populate with enough of our lessons so that students can access them at any time. So we very much understand, and honestly, if you've looked at the, I guess I speak to the public because I know that you have, the survey data, we were really surprised at really how balanced it was as far as how families responded to what they needed and how consistent it was really across grade levels. So we can't build, although we heard a lot of conversation about, and it was honest and true, that there was not enough synchronous learning in the spring of last year. We absolutely heard our families say that. What surprised us a little bit was how many families also said they needed flexibility in that learning, and that if we only went to a scheduled synchronous model, we'd leave out a lot of families. And so we want to be able to serve, again, in that idea of equity of access and valuing all of our students, be able to provide to the best of our ability resources for both of those families.
Thank you. Any other questions from board members to Josh? All right, Josh, I'm sure we're going to have more questions as the weeks go on and as the sands continue to shift for you guys. But thank you again very much for all the effort and time that's gone on into this planning and the information that you've provided. Next on the agenda is the approval of minutes, but we are going to table this until our next meeting because we had a board member who wanted to expand on some of the information in the minutes regarding comments by board members during the superintendent's presentation. So we're going to table the minutes for June 22nd, 2020 until our next meeting. Next item on the agenda, information and proposals, board committee reports, finance and facilities, Mr. John Cookson.
John can't unmute. No meeting, I believe, Mr. Cookson.
John can't unmute. I could kind of hear him. Oh,
Did I unmute now?
Yep.
Yes.
I'm on? Okay. All right, just a correction. We haven't had a meeting since the last report.
All right, thank you very much. Next item on the agenda are board member comments. Any board member comments? All right, I'm actually not able to see people. So if you have a comment, just go ahead and speak. All right, so there's no comments by board members. Next is comments from citizens. The Board of Education will recognize citizens of Middlebury and Southbury, and citizens are asked to state their name, their town of residence, and to limit their comments to 3 minutes. And please know that we do not generally respond to public comment, but we are listening and we do appreciate your comments. And I do see on the screen sharing that there is a number for you to call in for any public comments. And Mr. Nelson is going to help facilitate by calling out the digits of the phone numbers of people calling in.
Caller with the last digits 1155, you should be allowed to unmute yourself and make your comment now.
Hi, thank you so much. My name is Renee Brozak. I am a Middlebury resident. I have a child going into first grade at MES and then a child going into sixth grade at MMS. I wanted to thank Josh for putting all these plans into place, as well as the board, and especially for putting options into place, knowing that families are in different situations and have to make different decisions for their family and their children. I wanted to make mention that I really like the idea of the children being able to log into a live webcam learning for children who choose to stay and learn at home for whatever reason. Something that as a family with a child with asthma, something that we will definitely be able to utilize if we go down that route. And then I had two questions I understand you may not be able to answer, but one of my questions was, with having only one nurse at MES, and again, having a child who has asthma and has to go to the nurse's office multiple times throughout the day, every single day to take an inhaler, what will happen if there is a child who goes to the nurse's office with symptoms of COVID, and now the nurse is exposed, the nurse's office is exposed, so on and so forth, and my child has to go to that office for medical treatment? Would there be a backup plan for those students, somebody else that would be able to administer his inhaler so that he doesn't have to enter into the nurse's office? And then my other question would be, if we chose to do the remote learning, I understand that there will be more synchronous learning this year, which I greatly appreciate. We did not have that at all last year for either one of my children. So I think that's wonderful. But I think a lot of us parents would appreciate some type of training on how we can help our children. We weren't raised with Common Core, so on and so forth. So for us to be able to receive some training on how to help our children with their schoolwork to make an easier transition for them. So those are my questions. I appreciate your time. Thank you, guys.
Thank you very much. Before we get to the next public comment, I just want to reiterate, if you have any questions, the best thing to do is to email schoolreopening@region15.org. So thank you very much. Mr. Nelson, are there any more people waiting for public comment?
Yes.
Okay.
Caller with the last four digits 7233, you should be able to unmute and talk.
Hi, my name is Mallory Newson, and my son goes to Gainfield Elementary School. He will be entering second grade in the fall. And I guess just one of my concerns, we are an environmentally friendly home, don't use chemical cleaners and things like that, kind of go all natural. And I guess my concern is the amount of chemical exposures these kids are going to be exposed to within the classroom, buses and things like that. And I do want to thank you for taking the time to consider that and what the options are for that. And I really do appreciate that. One other thing that I noticed was just the teachers, if the kids stay in the classrooms and the teachers leave, wherever the teacher is going in the building, I feel like they may be exposed to something and then bringing it back to the kids, as well as the teacher's safety, about kind of moving themselves and then being into an area that might have also been exposed to 40 different other kids at one point throughout the day. So those are just some things that I was thinking about, but I really do appreciate the options and all the time that you guys have put into it. So, and allowing us to have public comment and the surveys and things like that.
Thank you, Ms. Finn.
So thank you.
Mrs. Manzo, there is no other callers at this time.
Okay. I'm just going to wait 30 seconds to give anyone an opportunity to call in if they missed their chance. So just hold on 1 second. I still have my timer here. All right. Let's move on to the next item on the agenda is new business requiring board action. May I have a motion to approve the Region 15 phone and technology lease?
We can't hear John.
You can't hear John. John, can you unmute yourself again?
Yeah.
Yep, you're still on mute, John.
Okay, how about now? Can you hear me?
I could hear you now.
All right, can you read the motion? I don't have a copy of it with me. Or somebody else can read it.
So this is Steve Soriani. I move that the Board of Education approve the Region 15 phone and technology lease for $350,000 as presented.
Thank you,
Second,
Steve.
this is Heather. Sorry,
This
Heather
is-
Rogers, second.
Heather Rogers, second. Is there any discussion on this motion?
Yes.
Yes, I have some discussion, please.
All right, Richard, go ahead.
Richard Spirito, we talked about this at the Finance Committee meeting, but at the same meeting, we also said we would be more open and have the account numbers and the amount of money available at this time. These two items were discussed separately, if I remember correctly. Joe, is that right? How come they're combined in one now?
The advantage of combining the two of them now, it allows the leasing rate to be lower. If we did it as separate leases, the leasing rate would be probably north of 3%. Small leases, the banks don't like bidding on. It's really a lot more paperwork for them to deal with. So that's why we did merge them together.
I'm not hearing you well, Joe.
Oh, sorry. If you can, if you'd like to say, can you
You
hear
wanna
me
bring
now?
up, Joe, I can bring up let me bring up the PowerPoint and then you can
Yeah.
show Mr. Spirito the
Sure.
specific
The
rate.
advantage, Richard, is combining the two together, bundling the technology and the phone system together allows for, in a sense, a lower lease payment on the overall. Because if we went for a small borrowing of like 150 or 200,000, it would be a much higher interest rate. Even though rates are low, the banks do not like to deal in kind of this lower end of the leasing market. One bank, for example, did actually back out when I did call at least for some kind of pricing estimates. They wanted to do $1 million or more in leasing. So we do have a few banks interested in giving us rates. But this is the $350,000 represents $150,000 is the phone system and $200,000 is the Chromebooks. We did have the, oh, Josh is looking around.
Sorry, I'm sorry. I don't know what slide you're on.
So this in a sense kind of like it's like an estimated payment structure we think would be out there for the board. It's about rounds up about $90,000 total, give or take, on the payments. And if we did the full lease for $350, Josh, flip to the savings slide. The phone system, as we talked about, is a badly antiquated system. The high school and Middlebury Elementary have a newer system which will talk to the systems we're replacing here. The central office, Long Meadow, they have much older systems that exist and are long antiquated. And they have kind of what's called these old copper lines that exist that come into them. And we would then eliminate all those lines and go to like what is called like one bundled pipe, which would save us $63,000 a year. And Josh and I've looked at the quotes multiple times. And vetted it. It is the savings is real. It's significant. We also did have the bond refi, which was done. We got a wonderful rate from Webster Bank, which was done late in June or July in our debt service. So we do feel that right now this would be actually be cost savings total to the district of $28,000 approximately based on whatever our lease payments come out to be. So we would get $200,000 in Chromebooks, approximately 750 Chromebooks at a cost of $250 each, and a new phone system which will support caller ID and all kind of the new modern features that we really, with a lot of you folks probably have right now at your houses with your cable internet service or whatever. So it definitely is kind of a, I mean, it really is a win-win, and we are going to need the equipment for distance learning.
Thank you, Joe.
No problem, Richard.
How many Chromebooks was that? Did I hear?
We do think about between 700 and 750, depending on the pricing. We obviously will go out for multiple price quotes on this. Most of the vendors are on competitive bidding services that exist. And depending on the model, usually they're around $250 to get kind of a pretty durable device. Chromebooks, there is Chromebooks on the lower end of the curve, but there is some reliability and compatibility that we want to be mindful of in our environment. And the phone system is through Frontier, which is through telecommunications. They're a state bid vendor, so that's, and we already used them already for the 2 systems that we're, in a sense, not replacing, just kind of converting.
So, and the lease is payable over, was that 3 or 4 years?
4-year lease, and it's $1 out. So when we use the term lease, this is a financing with $1 payment at the end. So in a sense, this is not like a similar lease to, let's say, car financing or something like that, where there's, in a sense, of perpetual $1 out at the end, and we own the equipment.
Okay, thank you. And this was vetted at finance?
We did review the finance. To Richard's point, we did review it as 2 separate items. But the debt markets have been very messy, to say the least, and they are getting better with the new rates. But yeah, the lower side of the borrowing, like I was surprised. I had one bank with actually a very good rate when I at least got some estimates, and when I spoke to them earlier this week, or last week, they did step aside on their rate because they wanted to go $1 million or higher.
And last question, I guess it's for Josh. I believe the phone system, well, and I guess the computers as well, but the Chromebooks, but the phone system in particular was, you did highlight that in the budget presentations, correct? I think you've advised us that this was coming.
We did. I think the things that kind of changed really in our favor was the bond debt was refinanced at a greater savings than we had anticipated. And that the bundling of the 2 really brought down the rate. So it made less sense to do them separately. Originally, when we talked back in the budget process, is we were looking to do the phone project through leasing at the phone company. But we would have had a higher interest rate if we left it that way. So by bundling it, I mean, we're really and now the need where it's budget time, we weren't thinking of going 1-to-1. We needed fewer devices. But by doing it this way, it really is a net savings of the budgeted amount of almost $30,000. So we're going to upgrade our phone system, bring in approximately 715 Chromebooks, and come in $28,000 less than the budget the board adopted back in June or May or whatever that date was. So that's where we think this is a win-win. It upgrades a lot of pieces of the district that have been lagging behind, and actually saves money in the budget.
Thank you for your answers.
Any other questions? All right, I think we're going to do this with roll call just to have an understanding of where everyone's vote is. So I'll start off with John Cookson. Aye, that's an aye from John. Okay, Heather Rogers.
Aye.
Steve Sirianni.
Aye.
Heather Dwyer.
Aye.
Sharon Attic.
Aye.
Richard Spirito.
I'm sorry.
Richard, can you?
Aye.
You're aye. Okay, thank you, Richard. Shannon Cavallo. Hi, Shannon.
Aye.
How's your vote? Aye, thank you. That's an aye. Peter Vaccarelli. I don't know if I see him anymore in this meeting. I know he was here in the beginning. Right. Okay, so, and my vote is also aye. So the motion passes. Announcements of future meetings. This is not on the agenda, but right now I'm asking board members to pencil in Monday, August 10th at 5 o'clock for a possible workshop for the Board of Ed in the self-evaluation and goal setting. That's not set in stone right now, but I would appreciate hearing from board members on availability for August 10th and, you know, whether you feel that we need to do an expanded goal setting or kind of build upon what we did last year in terms of goals. So if people can let me know that, I would appreciate it. Other meetings, Wednesday, August 19th, Finance and Facilities is at 6:30. Monday, September 14th, Policy and Curriculum is at 6:30. Monday, September 14th is a regular meeting of the Board of Education at 7:30. And again, all of these hopefully will be in-person meetings unless something changes between now and then. May I have a motion to adjourn?
Motion to adjourn, Heather Rogers.
Thank you, Heather. Do I have a second?
Steve Soriani seconds.
Thank you, Steve. Any discussion? All those in favor? Aye.
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 Any nays or abstentions? No? All right. Thank you, everyone, very much. We are adjourned for the evening.
Good night,
Thank
everybody.
you.
Good night.
Thank you.
Good night, everyone.
Good night.
Good night.